Everyone. Welcome to this Area 2 quarterly parish meeting. My name is Sharon Brown, Assistant Director Delivery, and I'll be chairing this meeting. First of all, I'd just like to apologise for my croaky voice during the course of this meeting. I'm afraid I've got a throat infection, so do bear with me. To confirm that this meeting is being recorded, and just to say that Councillor Toomey Hawkins, the planning lead member, is also present at this meeting. And Toomey, would you like to say good evening?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming over to spend some time with us. Hopefully you will find the information quite useful. I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to sort of mute and hide myself, but I'll be listening.
Thank you. So we've got a number of other officers here present at the meeting today. So we've got Nigel Blaseby, DM Delivery Manager, Charlene Harper, Technical Support Team Manager, Joanne Preston, Urban Design Officer, John Cornell, Environment Manager, John Dixon, Planning Policy Team Manager, and we have a number of planning case officers from Area 2. Most importantly, we also have the Area 2 Team Manager, Toby Williams. Toby, would you like to say good evening?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good afternoon.
So thank you all very much for coming along to this session. We hope you're going to find it interesting. So the main items on the agenda today are biodiversity SPD, which is going to be introduced by John Cornell, and an update on the design review process, which is going to be introduced by Joanne Preston a bit later on in the meeting. So just a few housekeeping issues first. If I could ask you to keep your microphones muted when not speaking, just to maintain sound quality. And if I could ask you to post questions in the chat box, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So I'm now going to go to the first item, which is a team update. And Toby Williams is going to take us through that with his colleagues. Thank you, Toby.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sharon. So just an update around resourcing. The team's changed a little bit since we last met. We've had a new principal join us, Jane Rodens, and unfortunately Lewis Tomlinson, who's been in the team from the start, my other principal, is leaving. So we're currently recruiting for Lewis's position and hopefully interviewing very shortly. Other than that, the team still consists of 4 senior officers and 3 planning officers. All my seniors are in place. We've had a person join us from Central Beds, Michael Allen, who's going to be kind of coming in and dealing with some of our backlog and also getting involved in some of the gypsy and traveller sites and planning applications that the team has presently. I'm still running 1 planning officer short, and again, we've been out to advertise for the planning officer post and hopefully interviewing to fill that position next week. In terms of kind of what's hot and what's not across the district, I think the biggest thing of late, Mandy Pinker's kind of got a question on, is an appeal that we've had that was allowed in over recently for a site that's outside the framework. I would say that we were surprised by the outcome of the that particular scheme and it being allowed, given that we've got a 5-year housing land supply, but the inspector provided sufficient reasoning to grant planning permission. That reason mainly was in relation to the need for formal sports pitches, which the developer was also proposing. So we don't feel that necessarily sets a precedent, but it's a very interesting appeal decision, and the inspector obviously gave considerable amount of weight to the shortfall of sports pitches, in particular in relation to that appeal. We've got another fairly large-ish appeal coming up on a site opposite the Bishop site in Histon. It hasn't been determined how that appeal is going to be proceeded yet, either through written reps or informal hearing. It's the Kendall Way site, so that will be an interesting appeal to deal with. That was a delegated refusal. So there are the area is very busy. A lot of my time at the moment is spent dealing with a variety of different enforcement issues across the site and trying to resolve those issues as much as possible. In particular, a number of the 5-year housing land supply sites in Cottenham, where highways improvements should have been made to the network and haven't, is occupying a fair amount of my time, and I'm trying to work out what to do about that and whether enforcement action is the ultimate recourse. So yeah, we're very, very busy as usual. We had a large application which is now outside of our area, but it's for the Ida Darwin site in Fulbourn, which Dean Scrivener took to the South Cambs Planning Committee in January with a resolution. Got a resolution to approve, which we were very proud of. That took around kind of 16 months to deal with as a planning application, but the outcome, I think, was excellent. So yeah, lots bubbling away within Area 2. Happy to talk specifically about any issues arising on particular sites if I have the knowledge. And I know Mandy Pink has asked a specific question, which I'm happy to answer either in this forum, Mandy, or outside of it. I'm aware of the issue.
Thanks, Toby. Mandy, would you prefer to have a separate session outside the meeting with Toby on that particular question that you've asked? Would you prefer that to be dealt with outside this meeting?
I think so, because I think it might take up a bit of time, so I don't want to take any time away from anybody else. It is a specific question, so yeah, it just relates to OVA.
I have already kind of, because I know that you asked the question of directly to Stephen Kelly, and I drafted a response for him. So perhaps after this meeting, I'll give you a call, Mandy, and we'll have a chat.
Okay, don't phone me on my landline, because we've got a total BT landline outage here, so you can only get me on my mobile, I'm afraid.
Okay, great.
So we've got another comment in the chat box, Toby, from Dennis Payne, Histon and Impington. Toby wasn't aware Bishop's site appeal. This is the one opposite the station stores, ?
No, it's the station stores appeal. It's been, the appeal's been in a while, but the inspectorate seems to be quite delayed with their process for that particular site. I think my preference would be that it was dealt with under a written reps procedure, but I think the applicant or the appellant wants an informal hearing or an inquiry on it. The actual Bishop's site, Dennis will be aware, is subject to a Section 73 application at the moment for some more units on the roof. That's been subject to a kind of viability review. We are minded to support that application. It's going to go to hopefully the next but one South Cambs Planning Committee for consideration.
Thanks, Toby. Any more questions for Toby in relation to specific applications or issues within the area team area? If not at this moment, then please feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat box, and then we'll come back to them later on, or Toby will pick them up after the meeting. So please feel free to continue to post questions and comments in the chat box. So in that case, I'll move us on to the next item, which is a shared service update. So thank you, Toby. And what we'll be doing for this item is there'll be a number of officers giving short updates as part of this item. So I'm going to start off, and as Toby touched on, recruitment continues to be a challenge for the service, and that's the service in general. So we've been carrying out a number of recruitments. We've been out for recruitment for principal planners and planners. And some of you will know that Julie Eyre, who was the team leader for Area 1, left the council recently to take up a job at Huntingdon District Council. So we have Michael Sexton acting up as team leader in Area 1 on a short-term basis, pending recruitment into the permanent role. So that role is out to external recruitment currently, and we're hoping to fill that on a longer term basis. But meanwhile, we've got Michael Sexton covering. We've also had a few other roles in the wider service that we've been recruiting for. So we've been recruiting for a tree officer, and that has also been very challenging. Difficult to get tree officers at the moment. So I'm sure John Cornell will want to say something a bit about that later on. So what we're seeing is a very challenging recruitment climate for planners and for associated professionals, specialists. And that's a national issue. It's not just a local issue. So we're doing what we can with our HR team to see what we can do to crack things and see if there's some new initiatives that we can bring to bear. But we know it's also an issue for the private sector. So even planning consultancies like Turley's, Bidwell's, for example, are also struggling to recruit planners. So there's a limited number of planners out there, and there's an awful lot of councils and consultancies trying to recruit them. So this is something that's being now recognised at a national level, and so hopefully we'll see some action nationally to address it. But meanwhile, we carry on. So the other thing I wanted to mention to everybody is you'll know that we had a backlog of planning applications due to a combination of factors, including being quite short-staffed, particularly for a long time until we successfully recruited into the post that Toby highlighted earlier. So we're now trying to catch up on our backlog, and we are appointing some backlog officers to help us with that. So we had one of those officers starting with us this week, and we'll be hopefully recruiting a few more. So that will be just supporting us in clearing that applications backlog. So moving on to a couple of other updates, we've got consultants in at the moment called Mondrum, who are working with the DM teams, and they're also supporting the teams in reducing the backlog of applications. And as part of that process, what we will be doing is distributing some of the planning applications across the boundaries of the area teams. Now we're doing that so that we're dealing with the applications more efficiently and more quickly, because where there may be a backlog in one team area, there may be capacity in another one. So to help with this process of clearing the applications and getting up to date, we are distributing those applications across the teams. So if you have any issues at all in finding out which case officer is dealing with your applications, then certainly contact the team leader, Toby Williams, or contact Jane Rodens, who's the principal planner, and they'll assist you. But normally certainly go to the team leader or principal if you want to know what's happening on a specific application and you can't get hold of the case officer for any reason. So I'm now going to hand over to Charlene Harper, who's our technical support manager, and she's going to give you a few updates from the technical support team perspective. Charlene.
Apologies, my technology is now being slow for me, so just waiting for everything to catch up. I'm going to do a little bit, obviously on the technical support team, haven't got a huge amount to update on, but I thought what I'd do is actually share what the team achieved over last year. So I'm just going to share my screen, bear with me. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that okay.
Yes, yeah,
Yep,
it's fine,
lovely.
Charlie.
Thank you. So as I said, obviously going to share a few facts and figures that the technical support dealt with last year. So in 2021, the number of planning applications that we received was 5,754. 86 of them was we received via the portal, 12 via email and 1% via post. The number of applications we actually validated was 5,655. We sent out 1,428 invalid letters, and the number of withdrawal applications or closed application was 862. So quite busy just doing validation. So far this year, and I took these figures from last Monday, we have already received 1,128 applications. That's averaging out about 161 applications per week, but the previous 2 weeks we received one of the highest I've ever seen of 245 and 194. I don't have any rhyme or reason why these 2 weeks were considerably higher. We do normally see a trend of them increasing this time of year anyway, but not why these ones were extremely higher than any other weeks. The number of comments that we received. So in 2021, the total number of consultee comments received was 10,841. The total number of third-party comments we received was 8,246. We obviously cover several mailboxes as well. So in our comments inbox, we received 638 comments as well. Land charges, we received 10,966 emails. Now, this will include requests for personal searches as well as our paid for searches, payments, queries, all bits and pieces like that. Our appeals inbox received 1,448 and our planning mailbox received 608 emails. Now this mailbox obviously receives a lot more than that because it's what we use to send out through our system and we use it to generate all our payments from portal. I have taken all of these out. That number is the emails that would have had to have been looked at by somebody within my team. Otherwise, I think the mailbox received something ridiculous like over 40,000 emails over the year, but I just took out what we filter out. A number of appeals we received last year. So we received 113 appeals and determined 99. Again, so far this year, we've already received 19 and have determined 16. Site notices was 2,847 and we've already sent out 401 this year. And we obviously do a lot of redaction work as well within the team. We recorded, and this is the minimum. I know there would have been more hours put in, but according to our record system, we did 385 hours redaction work in 2021. That boils down to about 10.5 weeks of time spent redacting documents, comments. all bits and pieces, which is why it's really important to actually really help people use our public access to help reduce the amount of time we spend in redaction work. Tree applications, we receive obviously a large number of tree applications. So last year we received 1,782. In city tree preservation orders, we registered 52, and requests for information for trees preservation orders, we received 137. Obviously, with the request for information, that can include 1 tree, 5 trees, 10 trees, but I just rounded up the number of times we were requested. Technical support team have only just started to deal with South Cam tree applications. We haven't taken on the tree preservation orders. It's something that we are working towards, and we hope by the end of the month that we'll have taken this on, and we will start to be doing South Cam's trees. Very similar process. We're trying to align both city and South Cam's trees for ease and best ways of serving the customers. Finally, I just wanted to point out we only received 5 complaints last year for technical support team, but we did receive plenty of compliments. I've just shared a few compliments here. Some of them are internal, some of it external, where it's just, you know, saying thank you for the work that we've done, really appreciate the work we're doing, how we've helped. And you know that they do understand how extremely busy we are, and we're still trying to produce the best work possible. That's it really from me, so I'll just stop sharing, hopefully. There we go. So yeah, just a few figures just to show just how busy we are. That hasn't stopped this year. We're still extremely busy, working extremely hard to get through the applications. This does not cover all the different tasks we do. It was just a flavour of what we have achieved over the last year and what we're still working to do.
Thanks, Charlene. Thanks, Charlene. That's a really useful update. So I'm now going to move us on to John Cornell, who's our Environment Team Manager. And John, just to give a few updates on your side of the service from a built and natural environment perspective.
Thanks very much, Sharon. Yes, I'm just going to give a very brief update. It won't be nearly as complicated as or as in depth as Charlene's. Haven't got statistics for you, I'm afraid. So B&E update, built natural environment. So we've got 2 new team members recently in the built natural environment that have joined us. Anna Patricia has come in to help us in landscape to backfill the position vacated by Carol Newell last November. And Sarah Cheng has joined the conservation team with Christian's gang. A few more changes are afoot in conservation. We've got 1 colleague retiring shortly, that's Tony, and another, Celia, who's actually going to be on secondment to Historic England, which sounds very exciting. We're currently recruiting for another officer or other officers to cover these posts. We've got a principal landscape officer also retiring in April. That will be Dinah Foley-Norman, who's been with the service for some time. And we think we've got a replacement for Dinah coming in from the private sector. So we're not entirely sure yet, but again, as Sharon said earlier, it's quite a challenging landscape when it comes to recruitment at the moment. As has already been said, we haven't had a full-time tree officer since, gosh, probably October, and that's been a very tricky one to hire. But we've got an ad currently out. We've got some interesting-looking responses to that ad. That closes in just over a week's time, and hopefully we'll be interviewing and fingers crossed have someone in post for that in the not too distant future. In the interim, it's important to say we do have cover for that role. We've got 2 part-time folks covering the tree officer role from different sides. And our ecologist, Dan Weaver, is just back from paternity leave. He's been away for about 6 months. We've had Jen with us during that time, who's done a fabulous job, and she's just about to leave at the end of this week. So key projects, well, we've got the biodiversity SPD, recently adopted by Greater Cambridge. I'll do a separate item on that a little bit later. But also our design and review panel was launched last month. That's also a separate item on the agenda that will be spoken to shortly. Work continues on a number of conservation areas. Recently adopted conservation area appraisal and management plan for Barrington. Currently out of consultation, one for Linton, Papworth Everard, Chesterton, Ferry Lane, with work due to start on Sawston, and Cambridge Central Area Management Plan shortly. More information has been added to our website giving advice on what permission in conservation areas is needed and guidance on listed buildings. And of course, we'll continue to update and keep current those web pages as they relate to that kinds of stuff. And that's all I've got right now. Thanks.
Thanks, John. So I'm just going to update everybody then on the enforcement review, which is another part of our service review that's just moving forward. So we have a consultant in who's working with the enforcement team, so Will Holloway, Alistair Fung and colleagues. And what we'll be doing is looking at our enforcement processes and systems, because we recognise how important planning enforcement and that service is to our local communities. So what we are trying to do is to improve the systems and processes within that part of the service, to systemise as much as we can, to automate as much as we can, and to make the process for serving enforcement notices and other types of notices as streamlined as possible, looking at best practice from other councils. So that's what we're going to be doing over the next 6 months. So Nigel Blaisby, my colleague, will be working with the consultant Mike Holmes on that, and working with Toomey and the city planning lead member Councillor Katie Thornborough on that process. So we will keep you updated through further quarterly meetings, and what I suggest is we'll bring a short update on that process to the next quarterly meeting, to Q2. So that's all for the shared service update. I can't see any questions in the chat box. Anyone got any questions on the shared service updates for us? No. Can't see anyone. Anyone want to ask a question? No. How busy are enforcement? So they are quite busy. They've done a lot of work on clearing a backlog that they had. So Will Holloway, who's been with us for some time now, has been, you might recall, Dennis, at one point we had quite a lot of turnover in the enforcement team. So we had a number of temporary officers. We also sadly lost a permanent officer who died very suddenly. You might remember Bill. So we went through quite a difficult period of turnover, but we're over that now, and Will has spent a lot of time working with Alistair and with Tony Wallace and with Charlie Jones, who's our new enforcement officer, on clearing the backlog. So they are pretty much up to date. The area that continues to be a challenge, excuse me, is around things like prosecutions and more complex areas where we might need very specific legal advice or litigation legal advice. And that we're finding, because it's such a specialist area, we probably will be having to think about how we do that, because what we're finding is we get something up for a prosecution and then it gets stuck and goes round and round in a bit of a circle. So we're looking as part of the enforcement review to try and speed up prosecution. So that would be where we've served a notice and someone hasn't complied with it, and then we want to take action after that. We would prosecute them. We'd also obviously do potentially prosecutions in relation to unauthorised works to listed buildings. That's another area where we might do a prosecution. So yes, we're looking at those specialist areas of legal advice and how we obtain the best advice and as quickly as possible. So that's that for the moment. So I think then I'm going to pass on to John Dixon to give a short local plan update. Thank you, John.
Hello, everybody. This is a short update, as Sharon says. We're currently processing all the comments that you've given us through the consultation at the end of last year. We've got a lot of feedback to get onto the website, and we publish all the material we've received, as you'll remember from the last stage when we published all the information last summer. In the meantime, we've taken our authority monitoring report through the Council's Cabinet earlier last month. And we're just in the process of getting that finalised so we can get it on the website. Along with that, a new document we've produced is a report on the infrastructure that was secured or money spent during that last year. We've published the figures for that before, but now we're trying to do a more comprehensive report to give better information on the sorts of facilities and improvements that are actually secured through the development plan process to get more information about those issues. We also recently agreed our response to the Water Resources East Regional Water Plan consultation. So you'll be aware that water resource was one of the key issues we identified during the local plan consultation, particularly important when considering future development needs and how they can be met. The regional process, which involves all the water companies, Environment Agency and other stakeholders, is looking about what measures can be put in place to address both the demand side issues, so can we use water more efficiently, but also look at supply. So in particular, can they bring in further supplies from elsewhere in the region, and how quickly can that be done, along with new reservoirs, particularly there's one proposed in the Fenland area. So we've given a lot of feedback from the council. We'll continue to engage in that process. I guess the other thing worth highlighting is that our neighbourhood planning programme continues apace. We've got, I think, some of the notable ones moving forward to their examination or even the referendum stage. Water Beach, I think, is moving towards its referendum. Fulbourn, Gamlingay, West Wickham, all very much well into their examination stages. So if you are in this call thinking about moving your neighbourhood plan forward, very much talk to my colleague Alison Torkington and keep looking at it. So hopefully we'll be doubling the number of plans that we've got adopted fairly soon, so we can keep that moving forward. Thanks, Sharon. That's my update today.
Thank you, John. Thanks. There's a bit of a delay there between my unmuting myself and it actually coming through. So just to flag that to everyone. So that's the local plan update. Are there any questions for John? Local plan or anything on planning policy at all? Anyone got a burning question? Nope. Okay, then, well, I'm sure John would be happy to take any questions that anyone thinks of later in the meeting or anything that we need to take away. So please feel free to post any questions that you think of a bit later in the chat box. We can always come back to them before the end of the meeting. Thanks very much, John. So next item we're going to move on to now then is an update on the biodiversity SPD. And John Cornell is going to take us through that. Thank you, John.
Hello, me again. Gosh. Okay, I'll try not to put you to sleep. Just a brief update from me on the biodiversity supplementary planning document. So about 15 months ago, Greater Cambridge Shared Planning began a new project to create a new biodiversity SPD, because the one we have for South Cambridgeshire was from 2009. And it didn't really reflect the existing policy landscape. It was pretty much out of date, and City didn't have a biodiversity SPD. So it was determined probably a good idea to get one in place. That journey ended last month with the completion and adoption of the SPD. So as you know, an SPD, supplementary planning document, is a technical planning document. It's used by developers, applicants, and government officers for guidance on specific topics, in this case, biodiversity, but it's a material consideration in planning decisions. And as such, quite important that we have the guidance right. So the Biodiversity SPD, as I said, was adopted by City Council on January the 11th this year, seen by South Cambridgeshire Climate and Environment Advisory Committee earlier this year, in I believe early February, and then finally adopted by South Cambridgeshire Cabinet on the 7th of February 2022. And this process followed an extensive public consultation which took place between July and September last year, and which generated a great deal of helpful and valuable responses from members of the public and statutory bodies, and also partners that we work with in the area. So we've created this new SPD, which is, we believe, accessible. Obviously, it's current, reflects accurate planning guidance, and this should enable, we hope, enable developers to continue to protect and better enhance and protect rather biodiversity as their development schemes go forwards more confidently. It is, however, quite a challenge because the landscape, no pun intended, is changing by the week, by the month, as the government released the Environment Act last November. And DEFRA are still in the process of releasing guidance to local planning authorities on how things within that act should be taken forwards. And so we're doing a lot of head scratching here. We're trying to get it right, but we're meeting to generate ideas and get in place guidance that will actually be helpful and practical for developers and applicants. But this is quite challenging because, as I said, the central government seem to release something every other week now that sort of has us on the edge of our seats. But anyway, the SPD's out there, it's published, and it reflects current national legislation such as the National Planning Policy Framework, as I've already said, the Environment Act, which came out last year, and of course existing local plan policies which are relevant. It's important to say, as I'm sure you know, an SPD does not create new regulations. There's nothing new within this SPD. We're not creating new policies, but it guides users on existing policies, so quite narrow in its scope. However, I must say, it should be said that the councils, both councils, did want to reflect in this SPD the recent biodiversity and climate emergencies. And so there is some language. There's an aspirational tone in the front, which reflects how the mood music might go with the next local plan, set of local plan policies going forwards, which are still some years away. But nevertheless, we think it strikes the right balance of guidance, but also sets the tone for what the members feel is important for developers to keep in mind. So as I've said, the SPD will be used by LPA officers, local planning authority officers, to give a clear, unambiguous steer on the existing legislative landscape around biodiversity and development, as well as setting out expectations and aspirations held by members. So it's a 15-month project. It involved, over 15 officers within Greater Cambridgeshire LPA, about 680 hours of officer time. So it was quite an undertaking. We brought in an external consultant to help us draft the thing. And so it really was a team effort, all hands on deck. And we think we've got something that's pretty good. So just some highlights. So for instance, what's in this SPD? What does it actually do? So it sets out guidance on things like integrating bird boxes in new developments. 100% of new homes are encouraged to have bird boxes, nest boxes for swifts. 25% of new homes on housing developments should include bat boxes. Fences with holes in for hedgehogs, which was a hot topic in central Cambridge just a few months ago. Green roofs will be encouraged to create valuable habitats for flowering plants. Reduction on artificial lighting, which harms nocturnal species such as bats and moths. Lots and lots of good practical stuff. Nothing crazy. I don't think there's anything crazy in there. It's all best practice, really. And really the big thing is this advice on the provisions within the Environment Act to allow developers a 2-year transition window to get in place, to get their act together really on implementing biodiversity net gain, which is this approach whereby when development takes place, we seek, and we will be seeking that it's left in a measurably better way than before that development took place. So 10% biodiversity net gain is in the SPD. It's not enforceable until the winter of 2023 because that's what's in the Environment Act. But we are really, I think, in the LPA, we're setting out our stall. We're saying here's the guidance. This is what we're aiming at, and so the expectation is there. And I think that should not just assist and help developers understand what they need to come to the table with. It should increase the bar, should raise the bar all around with the kinds of protections and enhancements for local biodiversity that's so important to parishes. So we're very proud of it. We think it will be a useful tool, and we hope that that's reflected in the feedback that we get. And it was a joint effort. We got a lot of feedback from individuals across the board. So do go and have a look at it. It's published at the moment, and much like everything else, we'll continue to improve and improve our service in line with what's in the SPD, and support the work in the parishes and in the wider district. That's all I've got to say on that. Any questions? Be happy to field them. Thank you.
Okay. I can't believe there won't be any questions about biodiversity, John, because it's usually a topic that everyone's got a question about. So let's have some questions on biodiversity, folks. For John.
You don't have to. I mean, there's really there's no demand for it, but I'd be happy to field any if anyone's got any burning questions about how it might affect them, or
Anybody got any sites where they'd like to think about what requirements might apply? Anything specific within the team area?
I would say to the parishes, Sharon, that one of the questions we've got about biodiversity net gain is that we know that it can't always be met on site, and so we'd be hopefully working with the parishes alongside and identifying areas within the parish that could be improved and enhanced through this kind of work. So yeah, is that a question? There's a question there.
There's a question. So Over is working with Cumsacre to make some improvements to our ponds and other areas. So that's good. That's from Mandy.
That's fabulous. I mean, one thing that comes to mind, and I won't go off on a ramble because it's just too easy to do that, but one thing that I always wonder about when I drive around the villages and look around what's going on within the parishes in South Cambs, we have a lot of recreation grounds, and some are sort of manicured lawns, for want of a better, they're very, very good, they're very neat and tidy, and others are taking on maybe a more holistic view on, having, I don't know, wildflower edges, or just thinking more about biodiversity, because obviously the parish, some parishes have land that they manage and others maybe don't have so much land. And so if you're a parish and you're thinking, well, what can we do outside of development boundaries, have a look at your recreation grounds and ask yourself the question, what are we doing with this land? Is it just football pitches and that's it? Could we astroturf the whole thing and just be done with it? Or are there opportunities to maybe just introduce some more biodiversity within those areas and just smarten it up in that way? Always worth thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, Mandy said helpfully, Over has wildflower edges planted on the green.
Fabulous.
So, that's a really good example.
Yep.
I mean, it'd probably be useful to collect some of these really good examples together.
Absolutely. Yep.
So what can be achieved? Any questions or comments on the biodiversity SPD or any of the biodiversity issues anyone wants to raise? Comments? No? Okay.
That's
Thank you,
good.
John.
Easy room.
Thank you, John. And
Thanks
we'll
very much,
obviously continue to bring biodiversity issues along to these meetings, and there'll be more updates as we work our way through the process. Thank you. So I think that takes us probably, if she's here, to the design review process. Beverly, did you say Joanne was here?
No, she's
can't see her.
just logging on, Sharon. She's not in the waiting room yet, but she has told me she's logging on.
Okay. In that case, I think it might be useful for us to just have a chat about other topics that you might like to see covered at this session, these sessions going forward. So we've put together a forward plan, and I think you should be able to see on the invitation that the next quarter session will be focused on highways and transport issues. So we're going back to the issues that you raised with us last year about Section 278 agreements and adoption issues. We're hoping to cover those in a kind of county focused meeting for Q2. So we'll be bringing along a lot of county officers to that meeting to navigate through those issues. So if there are any other issues, we'll also be continuing to update you on the enforcement review as well at future meetings. But if there are any other topics that anyone wants us to cover at quarters 3 and 4, then please do let us know. And we'd be really happy to do that. Make suggestions, pop them in the chat box, or follow up with Beverly afterwards.
Sharon, I would say that one of the issues or topics that might be worth discussing is the 5G rollout.
Yes.
We've had a number of applications in the area that have caused quite a lot of local concern, and I think to have just a general chat about those, number we've refused, a few we've approved, and I'm sure when it comes round to it, the next update, there'll be some appeal decisions as well. I think that would be an interesting topic, particularly around how the local communities can engage with the operators, which seems to be quite a large void at the moment in terms of process. So I would certainly suggest 5D would be an interesting topic for parishes.
Thank you, Toby. We'll put that on the list. I also thought it might be useful to do something like an enforcement quiz with everybody, and perhaps take us through some things about whether we can, it would be expedient to enforce against some individual examples of different types of enforcement cases. So I think we'll do that exercise perhaps at the next quarter meeting as well, if you can fit it in with the highway stuff. Okay, so Joanne Preston from our urban design team has now arrived with us, and Joanne is going to update us on the design review process. Joanne.
Hi, thanks Sharon. Sorry I'm a little late. I was grappling with the tube strikes in London, so
fortunately just
made it home in time. Okay, let me share my screen with you. I have got a presentation, but I'm going to sort of whiz through it because I know we've talked about this at other meetings in the past, so I won't sort of labour it too much. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to be talking a bit about the design review panel and just updating you really on where we are with that. So I did talk to you previously about how we were doing a review of our design review service, and that's now complete, and we've set up a new panel. So I just wanted to kind of give you a bit of information about that really, so you know what to expect from it. So just for anybody who didn't come to the last meetings, a really kind of brief overview of design review. It's essentially an independent and expert review of major projects, ideally as early as possible in the planning process, by a group of built and natural environment experts. So the idea is that the applicant presents the scheme to this independent panel, who then comment on the scheme, And the comments are really for everybody involved in the application. So the council, yourselves as elected members, the applicant team, and the idea is really to try to improve the scheme, and obviously yourselves as members of the public as well. So really this works in the kind of public interest. The advice of the panel is advisory, and it's presented in this letter, which then is attached to delegated committee reports. And it basically sort of suggests the changes that should take place. And then the idea is that the applicant has to show how they've responded to that feedback in their design and access statement, which they submit alongside the application. And the idea is it gives decision makers the confidence and information to support innovative designs. But it's used alongside other tools. So it's used alongside community engagement and also pre-application advice and all of the other tools that exist. It's been around for a really long time, and it's a very established process, and it's recommended by the NPPF. So these are kind of, this was something that's produced in 2013 about the kind of main principles of design review, which is still very much relevant today. And it's basically been proven to work. So there's lots of research out there which is showing how design review leads to good design being the norm and a more collaborative design process. And so there were three design review panels within the Greater Cambridge area. There's the Design and Conservation panel in Cambridge City Council, the Cambridge Equality panel, which is operated by the County Council, and then the Design Enabling panel, which was South Cambridge District Council. And obviously now that the Cambridge City Council and South Cambridge District Council come together to form a joint planning service, there's an opportunity to review the way that the two design review panels were working and make sure we had a consistent approach going forwards. So that was what the review was about. And the Cambridge Equality panel has a slightly different scope in that it deals with more strategic sites which have a kind of infrastructure element to them, whereas the Design and Conservation panel and the Design Enabling panel very much dealt with sites that were kind of major developments but didn't have the same level of infrastructure required. So the Cambridge Equality panel is still ongoing, and that was outside of the scope of the review. And then we had Esther Carland from Urban Design Learning come in and do this independent review of our existing service, and she made some recommendations to us. And that's exactly what we've implemented, really. So we now have a new single design review panel for the Greater Cambridge area called the Greater Cambridge Design Review Panel. Not very innovative name, but it makes sense. It's now a pay-to-use service that we manage in-house. So previously there were different charging depending on whether it was City or South Cambs. It was a bit confusing. We have a new panel, new pool of panel members, and they cover a much broader expertise. So they deal with sort of sustainability, biodiversity, architectural design, yeah, like basically they cover the 4 Cs of the Cambridge Equality Charter, so much more diverse set of expertise involved. We have an independent, we will have an independent advisory group which will oversee the panel. So the governance of the previous panels was a little bit unclear, and we felt that actually to kind of make sure that this is running up to best practice and it gets updated regularly, we need this kind of board to assess how the panel is operating. So every year there will be an annual report produced which goes to the independent advisory board. That will be made up of experts in design review as well as senior officers, and they will make recommendations for changing the review process to make sure it's operating to best practice. And there's going to be a new referral criteria based on significance of the site, the scale of the project, or the kind of site itself, whether the site is of particular public interest. And the feedback will be aligned with the Cambridge Equality Charter, so it will be dealing with the 4 Cs of that. And also one of the things that really came out of the review was that we need to improve our communication about the panel. So I think one of the feedback we got from yourselves is that some people from the public or the parishes weren't necessarily clear about actually what design review was. So we've updated our website with much clearer guidance on that as well. And the terms of reference and everything is on there for you to look through. And really, this is quite technical, but just to say that we now have 3 different types of design review that we offer. So we have a full design review, which includes a site visit, and that's what we expect everyone to go through in the first instance. But we want people to come back and use the service again so that the panel can see how the design has improved. So it's not just kind of a tick box exercise. They do actually have to make changes in line with what the panel is suggesting. So then there's a subsequent review, which doesn't require a site visit because we use the same panel again. And then finally, there's a desktop review, which is just the chair really, who will kind of assess the design. And this might be something that we use very sparingly, but if something's been through design review maybe three times, and it's just a kind of almost final kind of sign off, because we find that sometimes the developers say that they've done lots of things that the panel has suggested, but actually might not necessarily. So it's an opportunity for the chair to have one final look over the review. So for each project, the panel usually consists of the chair and about 3 or 4 panel members, and it's attended by the case officer and other key stakeholders. And the applicant is expected to prepare a briefing note in advance, and the case officer is also expected to do the same. So the panel members have time to review the information in advance. And so we're currently running these meetings online between January and June due to COVID, but the idea is that they will start being in person. And then there are 2 design review meetings a month, so they take place in the 2nd and 4th Thursdays of every month. And this is, yeah, just the fact that there is kind of information presented in advance. And yeah, conflicts of interest are taken very seriously, and there's a whole kind of section on this in the terms of reference. So it's really down to the panel manager and the panel member to make sure that there aren't any conflicts of interest. And if there are, if a panel member has been involved in a particular scheme or their practice has been involved in a particular scheme anyway, they won't basically be allowed to be on the panel for that project. And this is just to show that actually, you know, the response in the letters, which you'll be seeing as they're attached to committee reports, will be set out in the 4 Cs, and that was something that came from the review. And it's because the advice I think that was being given previously was very architectural and actually kind of missed some of these other elements that are really important for creating a really good community. And obviously climate now is at the heart of everything, so this is an opportunity to make sure that we're creating really well-rounded places. And yeah, the letter is something that you'll be probably most familiar with as you see it, but basically it's the panel chair who's responsible for writing the letter, so we think that's really important to have that kind of independent voice. Again, it's structured in accordance with the 4 Cs. And that will be issued to the design team who presented their scheme, as well as the case officer. I think the important thing to say here is that the letter is confidential, because obviously at pre-application stages, lots of these schemes are confidential. But once an application has been submitted, the letters will be made public on the Greater Cambridge Design Review website. So everyone will be able to see how the applicant has responded. Excuse me. And the design and access statement will be expected to refer to the letter and show how the design has developed in response. And one of the key things that came out of the review was that we weren't necessarily monitoring the impact of design review. So there will be now surveys done after every design review session to collect feedback from the independent advisory board. They will then feed into the annual report, which will be reviewed by the independent advisory board. And there'll also be a series of site visits as well that take place on completed schemes, so that the panel can learn from past schemes. And maybe just a bit of further information. So the website is now live for the new panel. So on it, there is the terms of reference for more information. There's a quick guide for applicants, but I think that's useful for anyone who just wants to kind of a quick overview of how the design review panel works. There's information about the panel chairs and the membership. There will be information about the independent advisory group. We are about to go out and recruit them now. And there will be the annual report and minutes from that. Obviously, once we haven't done the first one yet, but as soon as we do that, will be in public, as well as any letters, review letters for schemes that have gone through review once applications have been made live. So that was quite a whistle-stop tour, but basically we're up and running, and yeah, in line with the kind of the recommendations of the review. So yeah, it was really exciting, and I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Thanks, Joanne. I think we've got a few questions in the chat box.
Let me stop sharing. I'm not quite sure how to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you.
Stop share there. Thanks.
Great. So we've got a few comments and questions. I'll just cover Dennis Payne's comment back to Toby about having tried to engage with the 5G operators and they've ignored us. So it goes back to Toby's point about having an item at the next meeting. So yeah, this is a topic we need to cover at future meetings. So really interesting question from Mandy Pink over. Joanne, when you look at design, do you look at the style of the development as well as the materials used to build the development? Poorly shaped developments could be made to look good by using exceptional materials to build them. What takes preference, shape or material?
Oh, that is a really interesting question, and I think it's really site specific. It's very context specific, really, and ideally it needs to do both. So there isn't a kind of single answer to that, I'm afraid. You kind of need to know, you need to be looking at the specific scheme in its context, but really the form and the materials should both relate to their context, so it shouldn't be one or the other, I would say.
Thanks, Joanne. And then from Dennis Payne, Histon and Impington, how does an application get reviewed? Is it a decision by the planning team or the developer or the residents? So what's the process? Who decides?
Yeah, so it's usually a recommendation by the case officer, actually. So that's where it comes from. But obviously with this new service, which we're now promoting to elected members, we're hoping that they will kind of put a bit of pressure on in a way as well, by kind of expecting to kind of see the design review having taken place when schemes come to committee. So I think it's kind of it's for all of us, I think, to kind of to understand that this service exists and to be expecting the applicant to go. It is advisory, so they don't technically have to go. So really the sort of success of it is a bit about kind of how much we value it in a way, I would say. But I guess it usually comes from the case officer.
And I think you covered a point about engagement with key stakeholders. And there's a question from Dennis, does that include the parish council?
Yeah, so it doesn't include the parish council. So because at the pre-application stage, this is kind of confidential. So it sort of exists in the way that a pre-application would. So there might be kind of commercially sensitive information in there. But as soon as an application is live, all of those design review letters will be made public. So even the ones that kind of took place at pre-application stages will then be made public. So that when the final kind of assessment of the scheme comes, when the planning application in, all that information is there.
Thanks, Joanne. So I think that probably concludes the questions relating to design review. So thanks very much, Joanne. That was a really useful presentation overview.
Thank you.
So we've got one question which is about traffic. Our favourite topic. Swavesey is currently seeing an average of 4,500 daily traffic movements down Ramper Road, which leads to Northstowe along Stanton. It's Farmers Access Pen Road falling apart and shouldn't be taking HGV constructors traffic. And this is before the phase 3 build out of Northstowe. So why could we not get any conditions imposed on the 3B application? Will, do you want to clarify that question? Because I seem to remember there was a traffic routing condition that was imposed on phase 3A.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. There didn't seem to be any conditions imposed when it went through. It was Monday, wasn't it? You know.
Yes, it was Monday. Yeah.
Those figures actually from the end of last year, and they are higher this year. And the peak record movement down there was, in actual fact, 5,500 vehicles. Quite honestly, if that's going to carry on, we can't handle it in Swavesey, really. I mean, if we are talking to Tam Parry about it, but it's going to take forever and a day to get anything actioned on it. And by that time, there's going to be fatal accidents, I'm afraid.
So what I'll do is I'll take this one away because I wasn't at the committee meeting on Monday and that scheme's covered by our strategic sites team. But yeah. I do remember there was a routing condition that got imposed on the phase 3A scheme when that went to committee. Obviously that went first, didn't it? Because I remember that I think it's going to be done through the section 106 and actually be a section 106 schedule.
Yes, it did, but apparently there's a lack of enforcement for the HGVs. I mean, if the photograph going through Willingham and then photograph going into the site, nobody's available to enforce, you know, any action on them, which complete waste of time, really.
I think that was one of the issues that came up at the Phase 3A committee meeting, and what they were talking about was trying to use advanced technology. And so I certainly think that Dentons, who are our lawyers who've been advising us on the 3A Section 106 agreement, are looking at the drafting of that clause at the moment. So what I will do is I'll take that away and just check for consistency with 3B, because obviously the 3B Section 106 in a lot of respects will mirror 3A, obviously on a much smaller scale, but I will take that away and then we'll update you after this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Sharon.
No problem. And I think then, Dennis, you've got a comment. Disappointing that Parish Council not involved. We were at Orchard Park. Is that on the design guide, Dennis, that you're talking about there?
Yes, that was on the design reviews. Design reviews, not guide.
Ah.
I regularly sat on a panel chaired by Peter Studdert.
I remember. Was that specific to Orchard Park?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I seem to remember there was quite a bespoke process for Orchard Park at a particular period of time, and I think that was before Joanne, the Cambridgeshire Quality Panel, was in place, because I think there were some particular design issues that had been identified at Orchard Park, and an identified need to improve the general design quality. This is going back quite a few years, but I do vaguely remember this. So I think that was a bespoke process, which was local to Orchard Park. But certainly, I mean, as Joanne has said, the minutes from the meetings, once they're subject to a live application, then they would be published, and they would be published along with committee reports, etc.
I'm sorry, I mean, okay, but the community has an ownership for what's coming in, and what you're saying is that the community is excluded from the design review process. Fine, if that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing. I'm curious why we have been excluded. And then the issue about confidentiality isn't an issue. There are other people on there who will be getting confidential information. The Parish Council could as well be covered in the same way.
Do you want to say something about this, Joanne? Because I seem to remember it came up at the City Residents Forum meeting a while ago as well, yes, about the community involvement in the design review process.
It did, and it was something that, so we had an independent expert who's an expert in design review, obviously review our panels, and it was a specific question that we put to her. It's like, to what extent should the community be involved in design review? And it is, design review is it's an expert panel, and it's quite different to something which is starting to be set up in some places, which is a community panel. And so the response that we got, and actually we have, you know, previously on the design and conservation panel, the design enabling panel, it has been a kind of expert panel, and the community hasn't necessarily been invited to sit on those, and that is best practice for this type of review process, and that there may be in the future an opportunity to develop a community panel, and that's something that I think we're taking away and thinking about. But I think the kind of priority was very much getting our expert panel kind of operating to best practice.
Thanks, Joanne. And I do know, you know, that has been raised by a number of other community reps, and that's also in the city as well as within South Cambs. Thanks, Joanne. So I think that exhausts our questions for the moment, and Councillor Hawkins have said that was a very specific reason for that at Orchard Park, and that is my recollection, that it was to deal with some of the initial issues that had arisen from the early part of Orchard Park when it had been constructed, and some of the problems that I think we'd had with the early house builders at Orchard Park, because that was during a recession, as I remember rightly. So there were some particular problems there at that time. So that exhausts all our questions. So I think I'd probably just like to say that this is my last of these meetings, because I shall be leaving South Cambridgeshire District Council shortly. So my last working day is at the end of next week. No, don't worry, Will. I will take away that Northstowe question and get back to you before I go. Made a note of it. But I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who's engaged at these parish meetings while I've been chairing them, and that I've really enjoyed them, and I hope that they've been really useful and informative for you. And it's been great getting to see some of the faces at the parishes, and it's a shame it hasn't all been in person, you know, with COVID and everything, but hopefully in the future that might change, although I appreciate it is sometimes easy to get to virtual meetings. But just like to say thank you very much to everybody, and for future meetings I leave you in very capable hands of Councillor Hawkins, and also Nigel Blaisby, the DM manager, and obviously Toby, your area team manager, going forwards. So thank you all, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Bye.
Before we go, I guess on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you to you, Sharon, for your immense contribution to the planning service and to the work that we've been trying to do to engage with our parish councils. So thank you. We'll miss you. But hey.
Miss you all. Thanks to
you, everyone.
Bye.